Hello and welcome to my YouTube channel once again. Today we will examine the case of Giselle Pellicot. On the screen you can see my other cases. Down here you have my social networks in case you want to follow me on any of them. And without anything else to say, let's get started. Unfortunately, about Giselle's personal life before the events, there is practically no information. From the little we know, she met Dominique Pellicot in 1971, with whom she married 2 years later in France. Meanwhile, Giselle worked as a commercial manager at Électricité de France, the main electric power company in France. Alongside her husband, she started a large family. They had 3 children with a maximum difference between them of 3 years. As their children were getting older, the family was also growing. When Giselle retired, she finally had 7 grandchildren whom she loved to take care of and, in general, spend time with. But that wasn't all. Giselle had very well planned how she wanted to spend her retirement years. She wanted to get away from Paris and the fast pace of the capital of France to go live in a quieter place. Her dream, specifically, was to move to a place near the coast where she could live close to the beach. In March of 2013, she fulfilled her wish. At 60 years old, she moved with her husband to a house in Massan, a village located in the southern part of the coastal department of Vaucluse, a region characterized by its vineyards and landscapes near the Alps. This village, specifically to which the couple had moved, was characterized by being inhabited mostly by retired people who, like Giselle, dreamed of spending this time of their retirement on the beach. There, Giselle and Dominique rented a very beautiful house, located on a private street that had a pool and a huge garden where they loved to spend time. The decision to move to Amazon was not only to fulfill Giselle's wish, but also to help with her health. It turns out that Giselle was going through something very disturbing, something that had started slowly and was increasing. During that last year, this woman, described by everyone who knew her as a kind person, with a lot of energy and dedication towards her loved ones. She had started to have memory losses. Periods of time when she couldn't remember what she had done, where she had been, and other key details that were accompanied by extreme fatigue. Giselle had realized something was wrong with her when she woke up one morning. And when she looked in the mirror, she saw herself with a completely different haircut than the one she usually had. The biggest problem was that she didn't remember. Having done it, she didn't even remember wanting to go to the hairdresser. Being there getting her haircut, she simply didn't have that memory. So, confused, she went to talk to her stylist, who, surprised at his client's claim, said, "But Mrs. P, did you come yesterday?" It was this episode that made Giselle start visiting different doctors in search of a reason for these lapses of time when she lost her memory. While she and her husband was still living in Paris, they visited many doctors, but none could tell her why she was suffering from these episodes. More and more often, talking about medical issues, talking about health issues of her body, everything seemed normal. There didn't seem to be a reason for this to happen to her. The many tests that Giselle had undergone came back within normal range. So they had concluded that it was due to the stress she was under, taking care of her grandchildren every day. The move to Amazon was recommended by her doctors. They believed it could solve Giselle's problems, but it was quite the opposite. Even though she was more peaceful in that town, the episodes became even more frequent. The increasingly strong symptoms of an illness that no one could diagnose caused Giselle, a woman who had always been very sociable, to start isolating herself. She no longer went out with her friends. She lived in a constant state of anxiety, fearing she would forget what she was doing or what was happening. Worried, her family members began to think that this could be the onset of Alzheimer's. A suspicion that Giselle herself handled in her most lucid moments. At that time, her biggest concern was not having a diagnosis, not really knowing what she was facing or what could help her. However, the truth behind these episodes was much worse than they expected. For a long time, Giselle didn't get any answers. She went from 2013 without really knowing what the problem was. She tried to live her usual life. She tried to continue in the most normal way possible until the following happened. Giselle had been dealing with these episodes of amnesia for about 7 years. When on September 12, 2020, her husband, Dominique Pellico, was arrested at a supermarket located in Carpentras, another city in the coastal district of Boclos. He
is filming under your dress with his phone like that at the moment. You're lucky, I swear. It's my mother. I'll rip your head off. After...
Several customers discovered how the 67-year-old man was filming under their skirts, of course, without their consent. There had been so many complaints that the local police had received about this man who was harassing women of all ages. In a supermarket that a full team of detectives was assigned to preliminarily investigate what appeared to be the capture of indecent images, which in itself constituted a crime. As part of the investigation, they not only arrested Dominique, but also seized the cell phone she had used to record the images. Practically without any difficulty, the police accessed photos taken almost 10 years ago and chats from a French dating site called Coco d'Ivoire. On that website, Dominique was not looking for lovers, but accomplices. Upon reviewing the chats on that platform, they discovered that the man was inviting strangers to his house to sexually abuse his wife. And he assured them that she would not find out about anything that happened, as she would be unconscious. On that website, Dominique participated in a chat room called Azon Insu, in English without her consent, where he found other men interested in abusing women. With a court order, the police also seized the man's computer, finding a folder titled Abuses, in which its content was just that, hundreds of explicit videos and photos of the abuses he had committed against Giselle, but also against other women, like those who were harassed at the supermarket, or his own daughter Caroline, of whom he had taken naked photos while she was sleeping without her knowing. Through the images found and the dozens of conversations held, the police discovered that Dominic was drugging his wife with high doses of Temesta, an anxiolytic with a strong presence of lorazepam, which belongs to the family of benzodiazepines, which are known to have a fairly long list of side effects, if taken in such high measures as the ones Dominique gave to Giselle. Among these adverse effects are sedation, fatigue, confusion, extreme tiredness, and other things that were happening to Giselle. Clearly, that was the reason why, for years, but many years, almost 8 years of her life, she had such severe episodes of amnesia. She, since 2013, didn't know what was happening to her. Suddenly, she would have blackouts and come to, and her husband always knew what was happening. What's more, he was the reason why those things were happening to her. And all those years from 2013, 2012 that he was doing this, he never stopped. Needless to say, the investigation became much more thorough. They were no longer dealing with a crime of capturing indecent images, but were directly dealing with a serial sexual offender. A person who was already dangerous, focusing directly on what Dominique had done to his wife. The investigators focused on determining this man's modus operandi and how long he had been subjecting his wife to these horrors. In reality, it was easy for the police. Dominic was careless and not very intelligent. He was so convinced that they would never catch him that he didn't feel the need to hide what he was doing. Mind you, he was right back. It's not that he was smart, good at planning or whatever, but that he had hundreds and hundreds of accomplices. Yes, he took some precautions, but nothing out of this world. And both his computer and his cell phone were clear evidence of that. In the folder titled Abuses, the police found a total of 20,000 videos of sexual assaults on Giselle, in which the title was extremely descriptive. He was not at any moment trying to hide what he was doing. In fact, he had evidence. He himself had left the evidence. It was just the complicity of the people with whom he dealt that made him so self-assured. because each of those videos that he had left on his computer had the date of the event, the name and age of the abuser, and the phone number of each of them. It's important to note that at this point, Giselle still didn't suspect anything. She knew her husband was being investigated for harassing different women at a supermarket, but she had no idea what he had discovered. The police obviously were not going to suspect that her husband had anything to do with what was going on in her head. No one could think like that. No one would imagine something like that. No one is in their day-to-day thinking. My husband, who I trust the most and have by my side every day, is going to do something so horrible to me. So, when she was called from one of the offices to show up with her husband, she felt quite uneasy. That day, upon entering the interrogation room, the case officers showed her snippets of the videos they had found on Dominique's computer. That is, Giselle only found out at that moment that she had been abused for years. Unable to deny all the evidence that the police had, Dominique admitted his responsibility and even showed cooperation with the investigation. He admitted to filming his children's partners while they were bathing or changing, and uploading those images to the same chat room where he contacted the men, whom he later invited to his house to abuse Giselle. The police were able to prove that while the initial contact was through Coco.fr, the conversations between Dominique and his accomplices continued through messaging services like WhatsApp, where they agreed on a date and time to get what would be their turn, right? Before attending, however, he would let them know a series of rules, or rather instructions they had to follow so that everything went according to plan. For example, they absolutely had to park their cars far from the couple's house. They couldn't use perfume, creams, or any other item that could leave scents. They had to undress in the kitchen, warm their hands before touching her, among many other things. However, the most important thing was that they couldn't do anything to wake her up. When questioned about the reason behind such a macabre system, Dominique stated that he hadn't done it for money. He didn't ask for anything in return. He claimed to do it simply because it gave him pleasure to see how other men touched and abused his wife. It was for his own pleasure that for almost 10 years, from 2011 to 2020, when it was discovered by chance. Everything he did agreed that about 72 men abused his wife at least 200 times. Most of them belonged to communities close to Mazan, although there were 2 individuals who lived where the woman and her partner did. Of the 72 rapists, the police successfully identified 54, of which 3 were not charged or brought to trial. 2 of them due to lack of evidence, and the third because he had died some time before. Obviously, the main accused was Dominique Pellicot, against whom there was also the most evidence. But this man, now elderly, was not only accused of what he did to Giselle, his wife, but also of an attempted rape. It happened on May 11, 1999, when Estella B., a young woman who worked in the real estate industry, was attacked. And under one of her shoes, a DNA sample was found that could not be identified until 2020. When Dominique's genetic profile was taken and uploaded to the French police database, a match was found. At first, Dominique vehemently denied his involvement in the events, but after several interrogations, he admitted that he was the one who had attacked the young woman. This obviously opened a door to wonder what else he did, what other crimes he committed, because he really felt he was getting away with it. Nothing happened to him, and it didn't seem like anyone was ever going to find out. On October 14, 2022, 2 years later, French police accused him of a third crime, rape followed by the murder of Sophie Nam, a 23-year-old girl who had died in Paris in December of 1991 under very similar circumstances to those Dominique used. He always maintained his innocence of this crime, but beyond this, dozens of co-authors were officially found guilty. And while we can't delve into the life of each one of them, it's important to understand that there is a huge variety among these people. Their origins, their ages are not even similar. Adrienne 50, for example, was a 34-year-old construction manager. But there were also older men like Jean-Pierre Maréchal, a 63-year-old man, father of 6 children, whom Dominique somewhat adopted as an apprentice, teaching and encouraging him to abuse his wife in the same way he did with Giselle. A Among the aggressors, there are also men considered role models like Chris 50, a 56-year-old man. Watch out, he's the fire chief at the North Rescue Center in Vaucluse. This admirable person, considered by many to be an exemplary father, proved to be quite the opposite. Upon investigation, it was discovered that the man had not only abused Giselle, but also had 728 sexually explicit images on his cell phone, pertaining to young people, but also to little girls. Charlie A., another one of the aggressors who is 30 years old, started going to the Pellicot's house when he was 21 years old. In January of 2016, going at least 6 times between that year and 2020, Charlie, Dominique tried to convince him to follow in his footsteps, but with his mother, the only other woman besides Giselle with whom Charlie had contact. When questioned, unlike the other co-authors, he admitted to realizing that Giselle was drugged after the second or third visit. But this did not stop him from going back at least 3 more times. Nicholas F., a well-known print journalist, was also identified as an aggressor. Although, unlike most, he only went to the Pellicot's residence once, in January of 2018. According to his statement, he was deceived into going there as Dominique had promised him the possibility of having relations with other men. The idea was to have sex while Giselle was sleeping in the next room. However, Dominique convinced him to include Giselle, who, according to the old man, was in agreement with everything that was happening. Like many of the other defendants, upon reviewing his files, a huge amount of pornography was found, especially child pornography, although Nicholas never took responsibility for it. In fact, he said he had no idea how the more than 4,200 images and 200 videos of minors got there. How did they access my computer? Another of the accused that seems necessary to highlight is Romain B., a 63-year-old retiree who violated Giselle on at least 6 different occasions. And although he argued that he had been psychologically manipulated by Dominique, what is most outrageous about his particular case is that he was aware that he was human immunodeficiency virus positive. And he didn't care, he abused Giselle every time without using protection. In all of this, if you're wondering, for example, about the family's reactions, Giselle, for her part, decided to take matters into her own hands to report her husband, to be there for the entire trial, to participate in everything she had to participate in to bring him and his accomplices to justice. And then we have, for example, in the side of Dominique's daughter, the daughter who is 46 years old. And when she found out, she was extremely disgusted. She cried, she screamed, she made a tremendous outburst about what had happened to her. And obviously, to this day, she expresses that she hopes her father dies in prison. In fact, Caroline had an entire folder dedicated to her, of nude or semi-nude photos in which, according to her, she was clearly drugged. In fact, she later asked her father for explanations, who said he had never touched her. And how can she really believe him? How can she believe that he never did anything to her? It's something that she, unless her father admits it to her face, will never know. Dominique took photos of Caroline and his son's wives. No woman was safe from his perversions. All those photos he took, he also uploaded them to the internet. David, another one of Dominique's sons, intends to completely forget the man and hopes that a severe punishment is carried out. She also highlighted an occasion when Dominique played doctor with one of his grandchildren, something that worried her. Even though the abuser kept promising that he hadn't touched his children or grandchildren, all of this has caused great pain to the children of the former couple. David confessed that after discovering the facts, he had to vomit from disgust. Everyone took their belongings out of the house where the man lived, and they don't want to have anything to do with him ever again, affirming that they will not forgive him. The pain that Dominique caused his family was too much, as you can imagine. In fact, due to the magnitude of the trial, the investigation was extremely long. Finally, on September 2nd, 2024, the start of the macro trial was determined, which accused Dominique Pellicot and 50 other men of sexual assault against Giselle. As in all trials of this style, in France, the victim was offered the possibility of it being held behind closed doors, something to which Giselle refused. And that's why we know her story today and why all the news portals are talking about her. After everything she went through, Giselle decided that the trial had to be public in her own words on behalf of all those women who may never be recognized as victims. And this is extremely important because Giselle didn't let any media or narrative portray her as a humiliated woman or one who lost her value. She's a victim of the situation, and those who should be ashamed are all the men who abused her for 9 years, not the other way around. Little spoiler, none of these men seem really ashamed of what happened. With admirable strength, Giselle has declared in all the hearings that were given to her, looking her aggressors in the eyes and pointing them out. When I had to feel anger towards these men because at no time did they stop, at no time did they report, they came to satisfy their sexual impulses, they could stop at any time and not one reported. That draws attention, and literally, while she was declaring this, she was pointing at him with her finger. In her second testimony, she quickly opposed what was proposed by several lawyers of the aggressors about degrees of rape, making it clear that there is no such thing, there is rape. And that's it, right? There are some less serious than others, and less so in a case like this. The defendants also took the stand. The 50 men have had to testify one by one. 48 of them denied being sexual aggressors and gave different excuses to explain their behavior. The only 2 who openly admitted to being abusers and having assaulted Giselle were her husband, Dominique, and Cedric, 50 years old, whom the psychological experts of the case described as an individual with a level of perversity equal to or greater than that of Dominique himself. 12 of the accused confessed to having had sexual relations with Giselle while she was unconscious, but none of them took responsibility for what they did. They maintained that they did not know the woman was unconscious or that she had not given her consent. Although in the videos recorded by Dominique, the opposite can be understood. And it gets even better or worse, however you want to see it. Because some of the accused even went so far as to say that they are as much victims as Giselle of this situation. Since they were supposedly manipulated by Dominique, they were manipulated by a person, by another man, of raping his wife. Because, of course, it was very hard for Dominique to convince them to do that. They were in a WhatsApp group to take turns raping her. Others tried to excuse themselves by saying that if I was really a rapist, I would have looked for a younger one, or even saying that Giselle was pretending to be asleep. They went to trial, they were accused of raping a woman on multiple occasions, and they had the nerve to defend themselves in this way. The trial ended after 4 months, and the results have pleased some but disgusted others. Dominique Pellicot was sentenced to 20 years in prison for aggravated rape, production and distribution of images of Giselle Pellicot, and production and distribution of sexual images of her eldest daughter, Caroline, and the wives of her sons. He will not be eligible for parole until he has served 2/3 of the sentence. The other 50 defendants received sentences ranging from 3 to 15 years. Of these, 46 were found guilty of rape, 2 were found guilty of attempted rape, and 2 were found guilty of sexual assault. The reality is that Dominic may be able to apply for parole, meaning he may not serve. The 20 years behind bars and the rest, depending on his actions, he received fewer years than the prosecution asked for. Perhaps it's a good ending for some, but definitely not. Everyone thinks it's ideal. I think it's important to say this. And it's not that they're crazy. They're not men who don't know what they're doing. On the contrary, they're wicked men who found in Giselle a way to fulfill their fantasies, but who continue to act like ordinary people because they acted as if nothing. We're talking about grandparents, parents, siblings, children, and friends who had normal lives until they went to Dominique Pellicot's house. And that's the most shocking thing about the whole case. It could literally be anyone you come across in life, your brother, your friends, your husband. And the worst part is that even in that situation, they don't admit how guilty they are. They're not ashamed at all. But well, that's as far as we go with the case of Giselle Pellicot, a truly brave woman in a terrifying situation. Tell me below in the comments if you knew about this case and what you think about it. And well, that's as far as we go. Here are the Patreons and channel members. Thank you for supporting me through those means. And with nothing else to say, here you have a new video, here you have a recommended video. You can subscribe by clicking on my face, and see you in another video. Goodbye, thank you.